that case, I'm gonna select got it. Cool. In that case, we're gonna start to do it. All right, awesome. Yeah, so I'm very glad that we have a chance to talk about your wonderful startup journey and to hear about your experience. Just to give everyone a quick intro about her. YuHsuan is ex-founder of Botimize, and Botimize.io. Probably shut down the company after they got acquired. The thing is, they used to make it easy to track, test, optimize your chatbot, and it monitors usage of your product from product metrics to customize panels, sees the strengths and the weakness in your chatbot. That's kind of like how we knew each other. Probably 2016, I guess, right?
Yeah, 2016, the year where bots started to dominate the world.
Right. And then, YuHsuan, this is the AI Incubation Lab. We have run this program. This year is third year. During the summertime, student from Minerva University, also Son Masayoshi Foundation, that's the CEO of SoftBank. They do have a startup idea, and then usually 10 to 11 weeks, they try to turn their business idea into real startups. And then this is a week 4. So everybody kind of finished the business ideation stage, and then they started to build their own product. And then there are 4 teams, and all the teams, they do have AI component, also AI tech approach as a solution as well. And then, still continues to the introduction of you. And after the company got acquired by probably your friend's company, right? You're a startup acquaintance. She started to work for the Zendesk as a product manager, and then recently joined the early stage startups are based in Indonesia, right?
Yeah, the company is an Indonesian company.
Right, and then that's also a 500 startup a portfolio. And yeah, so thanks for joining here today, YuHsuan.
My pleasure, Jin.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, so just gonna we like to know can you introduce yourself and then what you are working on right now?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm YuHsuan. Originally from Taiwan, born and raised over there. So in university, I was a physics major. So we're trained to think. We know a little bit of coding, data modeling, but not in any real sense like software development or AI, right? Maybe these days, the younger physics majors do, but back then in my days, basically physics are about material science, like natural science, right? It's nothing to do with AI back then. So it's actually quite interesting how I tapped into the startup world. So before uni, I was a competitive physics competition practitioner. So I knew some people from the network who joined the International Olympiad of Informatics, right, or ACM. So those people were there in my network, but we were just friends. And then 2 or 3 years into the physics major, I realized that the academics was actually not as exciting as a career to me personally, as I thought it would be when I was a high school student. So I was basically starting to look out from a physics major perspective, right? It's we're trained to solve very complicated formulas and such, but in terms of real world experience and skills that can get applied to a workforce, maybe not so much. Right. So the obvious first direction that I looked into was actually management consulting. Right? My grades were not good enough for me to apply for joining a quant fund, but at least management consulting. And then I realized I would like to actually be a bit more hands-on than just being a consultant. So the next obvious thing was startups. Right? So I actually initially joined a startup called Carousel. It's a Southeast Asian unicorn that basically brings eBay. So now I'm feeling a bit nervous because I'm not sure whether eBay is even a thing for students these days. You can think of it as a marketplace, a listing, buying and selling website. right? So back then, eBay, Yahoo were the biggest marketplaces, but nobody, they're all on laptop, right? Nobody had brought them to the mobile devices. So Carousel was the first one that basically brought this marketplace experience on mobile in Southeast Asia. And then afterwards, we had Shopee, which is currently more dominant in the market. So I interned there and helped them expand to overseas markets. And the kind of successful consumer startup stories that we all hear. Carousel was a great hit back then, which inspired me to basically start joining some startup competitions because I wanted to be them, right? I actually enjoyed talking to the users and building features and such. So I reached out to my network and found those IOI basically programmers to basically join those competitions. It was a great success initially from a competition perspective, right? Because you just basically just make slides, you make a prototype, you go on the stage, bang, you get an award. But after a while, it started to feel a little bit empty inside because after all, making slides are very different from building an actual feature and releasing it into the market and getting real user interactions and revenues. So that's when we decided we wanted to bring the hackathon prototypes to the next level and to turn them into real products. I guess you can say that's like the beginning of my startup journey. In order to scale our products, we hired more people, right? We invested in marketing, in building more features, which brought us more users, and the story basically just went on. So there are a few pivots, switches of topics after we started, right? Based on market feedbacks and our tractions in the market itself. And then eventually we settled on the idea of Botimize that really took off.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. Like, you studied physics at the National Taiwan University, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And even like I didn't know like you consider joining management consulting firm.
Yeah, that's like a black history before my startup days.
Right. And then from the side of the question, but the thing is that you study physics and then you become also you have done the marketing role as well, right? At the beginning of your startups. And then software engineer, now more product manager, right? What's the a career transition and then your interest shifted to a product side?
Yeah, sure. So at the beginning, everything was very simple, right? I pulled together a team of the world's best coders of our age group. I'm the one that sucks in coding, so I did everything else, including user interviews, sales, marketing, partnerships, design. I thought, data analysis and design were probably some of the lower hanging fruits comparing to building a product myself. So I picked up those skills. And eventually, I think as a very, very young adult, you realize that you're better at certain areas of works than the others. And the sweet spot is really, as a founder, you got to do whatever helps your company move forward, right? But on the personal level, I think you can start to develop a sense of what you like, what you don't like, what are considered, on the sweet spots where you enjoy doing, people appreciate you doing, and you're getting paid for, right? By pay, I don't mean just like getting a job, but also where you get most of the returns from, even if it's running a company. Yeah, so I thought product management was really my thing. Generally a curious person. I would like to get interfaced with a lot of different functions, right? I want to know how to acquire users, so that's a topic, and it requires input from both marketing, business, and engineering. So it's a more cross-disciplinary domain that allows me to basically tuck my nose into other people's businesses without having to go too deep into the technical details. Yeah, but that's just me,
I see. No, yeah, it's makes sense. It's more like the how you can tap into different type of interesting topics, and then more in charge of the kind of entire, more having the responsibility for the product too, right? That's you can do many things too. And then actually, why did your company choose like bot? I assume like all the attendees, you guys know like a chatbot and bot, but the thing is like why basically you guys decided to work on the like a chatbot, the bot, NLP, NLU, even like a conversational analytics, like back to 2015 or 16, because back then was still kind of a little bit early, and then the end of like 2016 or 2017, like people started to know the chatbot is like the next hype and the big things too, right? The thing is I was curious at what's made the decision that you guys gonna focus on like this area.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So back then, the state of the team was we were 3 years into running our own startup together as a team. The previous few ideas, initially, just like most founders, we set out to imagine as a consumer, right, which products are needed in the market. So it was a B2C product. But after a few iterations, we realized that as a team, because we're a bit more geeky, I would say, we're actually prefer working on more on the B2B side of the things, more on data, more on there's a bit less experimentation and guessing what the next trend is, what the end user wants, but rather, like in B2B, you could basically just talk to your target customer and they'll tell you exactly what they want. So you would still need to synthesize that message from your different customers and, like really just put them into a proper feature, right? As a product person, but at least there's a lot less guesswork, right? Because sometimes the consumers don't even know what they want. So this is more our thing. So when the previous ideas didn't work out, we decided that this time we're going to work on something a bit more data-driven, a more B2B, and at the same time, the market has to be fast growing, right? Because maybe this is worth mentioning that our product before Botimize, the chatbot analytics, was a knowledge-based management system for researchers. So it's a good product that's solving real problems, but there wasn't necessarily a market that's willing to pay in the area, right? So when we decided to move away from this, we decided that, okay, after all, we're running a business, we want to earn money this time. So let's choose a market that's still fast expanding. And back then, two of the hottest topics were chatbot and crypto, right? And crypto is more like a hype to me personally, right? I mean, at least for chatbots, we can imagine what the application scenarios would be. It's easy for us to see that, oh, okay, chatbot makes sense as a new interface because mobile had officially taken over laptops, web, as the main interface for most consumers, right? But the problem we're facing back then was everyone's getting saturated with a number of native apps that they install on their phones. So we noticed that users nearly never download new apps anymore. And on the other hand, they're just spending more and more time on the few apps that they're already familiar with, right? So with this trend, what makes sense is as a new business, if you're launching a new business, instead of launching your own app, it makes more sense for you to just become an application on somebody else's app, as a platform initially. And after you grow your own audience, you move out, right? So that's basically how we saw the chatbot opportunity. We thought like, this makes a lot of sense. There are going to be a lot of people who invest to build things in this area, right? Jim was one of them. But for these builders, they're going to need tools. So we wanted to become the shovel maker during a gold rush. We don't go dig the gold ourselves, we supply the tools, right? So for you to build anything in the market, what you need is a really good analytics tool to show you how you're doing, your product's doing, what are your users doing, right? And where to improve. So that was basically how the idea of Botimize came around. And the hypothesis was proven to be quite accurate. So at one point in time, of course, this is super early, right? 2016, 2017. At one point in time, we were processing more than half of the total chatbot traffic on Facebook.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's like pretty cool, right? And it helps that we had some of the world's most popular chatbots using our services at that point in time.
Right, right. And then you guys become like probably the biggest the conversation analytics tool in Asia, right? Because I remember there's one in US, also like Europe, and then Asia is like you guys too, right? That's kind of like I remember.
Yeah, I would say there are just few of those tools in the world back then. Most of our traffic still comes from English using bots in the Western world because like Asia is like always like one step behind the US, right? So most of the traffic still comes from there. We're like number two, number three globally. In Asia, we're the biggest one because the market is so early and we have the local context to onboard bots in the different Asian languages.
I see, I see. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, yeah. I talked to like a few of them like after I shut down Foxy actually a few months ago. That's kind of like reminds me even like in Dashboard they shut down the business too, right? A few months ago. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so the funny thing is, I feel like we're just drifting away from the agenda more and more.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, maybe like we should go.
Yeah, but no worries. I think this is an interesting story to share. So, when we started out, there were only three chatbot analytics in the world. Right, the first one is Dashboard, founded by serial entrepreneurs in the US. They started out with 2 million US dollar funding for their seed round without a product. The second thing was Bot Analytics. Previous founders from 500 Startups Accelerator. So they got some pocket money when they started out as well. Turkish founders in the US. And the third team are Bot Analytics. Basically, the second and the third have almost the same names, like Bot Analytics or something. I think Indian and Singaporean founders who stay in the States, right? And then we're the fourth one. Yeah, but we actually didn't know there were other products on the market until we launched because we pretty much were building our products around the same time. So when we launched, we saw that, oh, the other three teams already had their fundings. But since SaaS is actually a very long tail market, like everyone can find their own like niche because the pie is big enough. We went in regardless. And the interesting fact is for most developers, you actually use multiple tools, especially if the tools are still a bit immature, multiple tools to do the same things, right? So it's not like mutually exclusive. So the four of us launched first. The Singapore team exit first. They basically went through a merger with another startup. And then I think the 500 startup went out second. I think Dashboard secured another round of funding, but eventually they shut down earlier this year. And currently the only one that's still in the market is the, I suddenly couldn't remember their name, but basically the Bot Analytics by Google's internal accelerator. So it's part of Google Analytics now. And the reason for that, and this is actually the reason why we decided to sell the company, was chatbot was a very new market back then, right? And if we look at the industry, the first layer are the service providers that uses their chatbots to interact with consumers. Okay, so after the consumers have widely accepted, interacting with chatbots, then these service providers can earn money. So after they earn money, they'll pay people who help them build the chatbots, right? And then after the chatbot builders earn money, they will invest in tools that help them build chatbots for their clients like us. So we're like at the end of the value chain, which is useful, but from a monetary perspective, we're like at the very bottom of the funnel, which is very narrow, right? So when the market doesn't grow fast enough, we don't get enough revenue. And personally, I think that's the reason why most of the chatbot analytics couldn't sustain, because our usages are growing, but we don't see the same trend in our revenue. And as startups, we didn't have enough like body fat to weather through the winter, right? And that's something bigger services like Google Analytics would be able to do.
Yeah, it's a very, very true. Like I clearly remember. And then by the way, like a past 10 minutes conversation could give you like an idea about the the answering like why not, right? But because any of like a startup, it has been like a problem. Maybe it is problem. It will be problem still in the 5 or 10 years. But thing is always you need to think about why now,
Timing.
why this, timing, like why you need to like start like this business. So you guys can listen, and if you do have any question to me or to us, like you guys can ask a question too. And then let's move to like the next question. And then so like one of the highlight for your like the startup Botimize is that you went to a Zero Stop AI. That was an AI focused accelerator program in Asia. Like basically how was attending the accelerator program, and then what would you suggest to like a startup founder, was like a potential entrepreneurs like today's attendees to spend the program and maximize the outcome by the end of the program? In this case, we still have 6 weeks and a half. This like a program, summer program is like 11 weeks incubation program. They just like start to work on building MVP right now. So like, what would you suggest to them? And then how was the experience on attending the accelerator program?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your life cycle. But since you guys are here, I'm assuming you're basically myself, just a few years younger. So if I'm running Botimize as who I am now, right, with more connections, with more industry experiences, I'm pretty confident to say that the outcomes will be quite different, right? Because I would know which rings to pull, which strings to pull to get my company a better exit, right? But as a young founder, I think, and this might not make sense for you at the moment, but it's really like from the bottom of my heart after all these years. I think for you, running your business and making sure it's a success is very important, yes. But the success rate is probably like 1% or less, right? So on a more realistic note, personal growth is guaranteed. Most founders actually don't make it in their first attempt in starting a startup, but what you can preserve and carry on, and it brings a compounding effect, is actually your learnings from each round of your iteration, right? So if you join an accelerator, it's like you could learn from other people's experiences and other people's eyes, right? Because you only have so much time. You're just running a startup, at most 2 startups at the same time. So your learnings are limited to personal experience. But if you join an accelerator, there are going to be investors who provide a different perspective to help you understand what the investors are thinking, right? For you to raise money. And you'll learn from your fellow other founders as well, right? And also there are going to be mentors for you to talk to who could end up to become your friends for a lifetime, right? I think Jin joined the accelerator after me, and it's like our networks are so overlapped now, right? We almost attended the same wedding earlier last year in India, but too bad COVID. Yeah, so that's, I think you'll get some friends for a lifetime through an accelerator program. So at this stage, I think as a young founder, some people are a bit more concerned that the funding you're getting out of the accelerator compared to the percentage of shares that they ask for is not that good of a deal monetary wise. But I think we should actually look at the issue from a different perspective, right? I mean, you're so young, there's nothing to lose. What you can take away from the accelerator program is not just for this current startup that may or may not work out, right? So think for the long term. Join a program. If you're already very well connected and know what you're doing, fine, you just go ahead and do your own thing, right? But if you feel like you need that community, and as a matter of fact, a lot of ex-cohort mates, right? You and your neighboring startups in the same accelerator ended up starting new businesses together that really took off. So count that network value in when you're considering joining a startup accelerator.
I see. No, yeah, I can agree more than that. Basically, a compound interest for the learning, peer-to-peer network with other attendees, also the network with the other mentors, investors, anyone who can help you to grow your business. And then, yeah, it's like it totally makes sense. Yeah, I still remember 2016 and 17 experience too. All right, cool. And then it's kind of like that's kind of like a good segue. What do you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that's as an ex-founder? So if you're gonna start your startup right now again, right? How would you approach differently?
I would say product distribution is as important as building the product itself. So that's a lesson I learned the hard way, right? Because as geeks, we thought, if we talk to the user and understand their needs, and then we build a product that works, the user is happy, we just get money. But unfortunately, in the B2B setup, it's not necessarily the truth. So in B2B, usually your users are not your customers. Let me repeat that again. Your users are not always your customers. Your customers are the ones who have their names on the credit card to pay for your product, right? So understanding the difference is pretty important, especially if you're running a B2B startup. I would say B2C is a bit more straightforward at the beginning because your users are your customers, right? But for B2B, really knowing, I would say the coverage area is a bit wider. There are few more different personas that you need to basically take care of for your product to be successful. And by product, I don't just mean the features, right? I mean like your go-to-market, your support strategy, your customer support documentations. How do you expand? How do you pitch to your customers? How do you actually close a deal, right? Because there's actually a sales cycle in the B2B world. So as a founder, I would say now that I have more industry experience, and also with my time in Zendesk, I was basically the one who got pitched a lot by startups. I now understand more how the decision-making process is like, right? So next time, if I'm running a startup, or like now I'm joining a growth stage startup, I know a lot better how to pitch to those bigger guys. But as a young person, without much experience, it was kind of hard to figure it out from the outside, right? Because sometimes, to be honest, the decision making just doesn't make sense, but it is what it is.
Right. No, it makes sense. And then, yeah, I do have like a two to three questions more, and I'm gonna open up to like you guys. And then, in that case, like, what's the difference between working on your own startup and then working for a big tech company like Zendesk? You kind of slightly like touchy right now, but things, what's the experience? Because I haven't done like any of the big corporate work, so I'm even like a personally curious on that side.
So when I sold my startup in 2018, early 2018, late 2017, I basically back then we had some traction. So there were some angel investors who were willing to back me again if I start another startup. But I decided not to do so because personally I feel a little bit burnout at that point in time, to be super honest. And also 4 years into running my own startup, I feel like I was constantly firefighting for my team to move forward, right? So for the engineers, our skills were growing, so their skill sets were growing. But as a CEO, I didn't really have that core competency, or so I thought, right? So I wanted to experience, first of all, to take a break. And secondly, to experience if I am to choose to act as one role, where is my core competency, right? So I decided to join a bigger company to observe from the inside how to run a organization properly. Because as a founder, it's like, oh, we're launching our landing page tomorrow, but we don't have terms of service. And then you go and Google and download a template and just bam, put it on, right? Or when you're trying to close a deal, you just relentlessly go to the customer or try to talk to people around them to influence the decision. But how to operationalize this and set up a process that's scalable for your teammates to do, not just you. It's an art, I would say, right? And in those bigger companies, they had basically so-called best practices that they accumulated over the years and trial and battle tested, right? So I wanted to be on the inside to see basically what those things are. right? So that's why I joined Zendesk, which was a company that I admire a lot as a startup chatbot founder, especially, right? And as a product manager, I think this particular position is given the privilege to interface with any function you like, right? Like engineering, sales, marketing, business strategy, right? So I would say I learned a lot, right? Before I joined Zendesk, I sold my company. So we went through acquisition. I was the selling side, right? Within Zendesk, I joined a product called Chat, which is a live chat product that Zendesk has, which was an acquisition 6-7 years ago. So I experienced a life of an acquired entity, right? Trying to integrate to the main products in the main company. And within my time in Zendesk, I also helped acquire the company. So it's like I'm on all sides of the table so that next time if I'm selling a startup, I think I'm going to have a better strategy. Yeah. So, but then of course, like I think the downsides of working for a bigger company is pretty well known, right? It's just a lot slower, a lot more politics, a lot more everything, right? So I think when I joined Zendesk, I basically gave myself a 2-year deadline and say, no matter what, no matter how bullshit I think this is going to be, I'm going to stay in the company for 2 years because I think that's the decent amount of time for anyone to learn about all the trades, right? But in the end, I stayed for 3 years because of COVID. But now I'm finally out and back to the startup world. But no regrets. I really learned a lot using my time in Zendesk, not from the coaching or the training from the company, right? But just so it's such a big environment for you to explore as an insider.
I see. Oh, I didn't know that you wanted to just, or you plan to just stay 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, like always cool. Put a deadline on things, right? If things work well, fine, you can extend. But I think when you decide to invest your time on something, it's good to know why you're doing what you're doing, right? And give yourself some time, like a deadline to finish what you set out to do.
No, yeah, 100% makes sense. And then I do have like one last question, and then I'm gonna open up to everyone. And then my last question is, so what's the process, or like how was the process of acquisition, and why did you decide to sell your company? Okay. Like buying out, like different component, but like that could be great to hear.
This is a topic that everyone has heard of, but no one really talks about because there are a lot of secrets and it's not always scientific, especially for early stage startups. So why I decided to sell my company was because we were scaling so fast, but we don't see revenue at the same level coming in yet, right? So we believe in the long-term, like super long-term vision. We believe that chatbot analytics, just like any analytics, is a market in itself. But the reality check is, as a startup, we didn't have enough resource to sustain that level of traffic until we're revenue making, right? So we were basically faced with two options back then. The first one, just shut down everything and move on to another, area. And the second option is to basically, send our baby to a family that can support and grow them, So we chose the latter, and which is also why we were in talk with some of the bigger players, like big brands in Southeast Asia back then. But eventually we decided to sell our product to a friend, right? Because the company that acquired our product is in a neighboring area. So they're not like buying our company just to shut us down and move us over to other projects. They were actually interested in the product and its user base, right? So we knew that, our baby is going to be well taken care of in their new home. So that was the story behind it. And in terms of the process, when a company is in later stages, when they go through an acquisition or a merger, the valuation will be, I would say, more scientific, because at that point in time, the company assets are pretty clear already, right? And you'll have its own stable revenue stream, customer context leads, right? And so it's easier to build a model to value the companies through like valuation. Right? So usually when we see SaaS companies getting acquired in later stages, usually the acquisition amount is just a multiple of their ARR, annual recurring revenue. Yeah, but in earlier stages, actually mergers happens all the time, right? But nobody really talks about how to calculate it because it's mostly based on negotiation, I would say. So there are a few types of reasons why a bigger company will want to acquire a smaller company. It could be for the team, so equity hire, right? Sometimes it's just purely for the talents, for the raw intelligence. Sometimes it's because they want the team to work on an area that they're specialized in, right? So obviously the latter will have a higher valuation compared to the first one. So acquisition, talent equity hire. The second reason of buying a company is for its legal entity and the brand name, right? So usually it's for the customer base. And the third kind of acquisition would be for the product. So let's say if Zendesk acquires a chat app, then it's to enrich its product portfolio, right? So it's a product plus customer base acquisition. And the fifth type is a technical acquisition. So they're probably not necessarily interested in the product, but they're interested in the technology behind it. Right? So I think Siri, the virtual assistants acquisition was this kind. So depending on the different types of acquisition, you can get different valuations, right? So as you can imagine, equity hire is the lowest. They're just hiring your team as a package. So you'll get the amount slightly more than hiring everyone individually. And then the next ones will be for the customer base or for the product and the technology, right? But a rule of thumb is if your company's total funding is under, I say, $5 million, then usually when you're selling your company, the acquirer wants both your product and your team. So the acquisition amount will be calculated by something like this. So they'll count how many productive people are in your company. If you're a product company, they count the number of product managers and engineers. If they're acquiring for your sales force, they count how many people can close deals in your company, multiplied by a package, right? Let's say per headcount, I pay you 500K, plus some additional resources, right? So you see that there's a lot of negotiation over there. And it's not as scientific as later stage startups.
100%. Yeah, I remember when my company had this type of topics. I just call it, hey, YuHsuan, do you have a minute? Can we just have a chat?
Cool. Yeah, and this actually ties back to why you need a startup network, right? Because just like I mentioned that, okay, you can count how many productive people you have, but what about the multiplier? It actually depends on the geographical area you're in and your industry. And no investor will basically show their range, right? Their multiplier. So you need to get these numbers from your existing investors, your mentors, and your other peer founders who have went through similar process.
Yeah, 100%. Because actually these topics, not everybody willingly to share because it's legally, emotionally, it's kind of a sensitive, and then it's just I kid you not, these topics is very, very emotionally tiring for the founders, and that's kind of I really remember. And then even if you Google it, usually you cannot find what exactly happened to it. But thing is, in order to make sure because you are knowing the things you haven't done, that's unknown things too, right? So to understand the entire process, probably you wanted to talk to somebody went through this process, which having the right network is always super helpful. And then let's move to Anna's question. Anna, you can ask directly to YuHsuan.
Yeah, I was curious whether it makes sense to keep a specific exit strategy in mind and try to build towards that strategy. So, for example, our startup is a social network for plant enthusiasts. There is a technology behind it, which is like AI expert that gives people advice based on the photos and the survey feedback that users give. But at the same time, we don't see this technology as being something that like distinguishes us from the rest of the market. And it makes more sense that we focus on the community and actually like future numbers of people who are going to be using our product. So then should we kind of like focus our strategy more towards that goal that potentially we will exit using this like user-based strategy? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as a founder, you should definitely have your preferred way of exit when you're running your company, right? But at the same time, you can stay fluid based on how things develop, right? I'm saying you need a direction in mind when you start out because it impacts all the decisions that you're making, right? So let's say if you don't want to ever sell your company, you're growing the company to IPO, or if you like to actually keep the company as a private company, you know, there are pros and cons for each option, then the way you run your company could be very different. And let's say if you're aiming for an acquisition, based on the different types of acquisitions, like which type do you want to be? You know, we've heard of stories like founders knowing their startups needs to be sold out soon. So they started hiring a lot just to buff up, you know, that base number for multipliers. Right. So hopefully your startup doesn't fall into this category. But if you're aiming for an buy over, what I would suggest is actually to have a few projected acquirer, you know, as the end game. So let's say I've seen companies doing very smart things with Zendesk when I worked there, right? So early in their days, they knew that they didn't want to go IPO on their own. They want to get acquired, right? So who's going to acquire them? So they listed out a few companies as their targets. Actually, I did this as well, and Zendesk was my like top choice. They approach those bigger companies. So you know, like bigger companies will have some department called corporate development and partnerships, right? So corporate development is like anything the CEO is interested in, right? Partnerships, investments, acquisitions. So they approach those functions with those bigger companies. And for a bigger company to be interested in you, you need to provide value that's very relevant to them, right? So basically, some of those partners basically offer like add-ons to help our customer use their add-ons on Zendesk for features that we don't have or designed not to develop, right? Or some of them help us tap into markets that are harder to get into. So Zendesk is a US-based company, right? So it's harder for us to tap into certain sectors in new markets, such as, let's say, for example, governments or hospitals in the Southeast Asia market. So if a partner comes to us and say that, hey, you know, I have a lot of those existing customers who want to use our product together with Zendesk, then bam, that's a partnership, right? There's a investment even, and eventually I believe acquisition as well, right? So I would say as a founder, your roadmap needs a overall vision and direction, right? And how do you choose how to prioritize things actually really depends on where you want your company to end up to be, right? And if acquisition is something you're thinking about, then sure, you know, you should use that as a guideline for you to make decisions.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's take 2 more questions and then we can wrap up. Anyone has any question? All right. Nick, actually, I do have a question. So you raise money from investors too, right? And what was raising money from investors, and then how did you persuade them when you sold Botimize? Because you got the investment too, right?
Yes. So, sorry, is the question about how to deal with existing investors when you exit, or how to raise money?
That's like two questions, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so,
like we can talk the latter one. Like how did you deal when you exit your startup, the existing investors?
yeah, so we had a group of very angelic investors, I would say, who care about the well-being of the founders other than the return itself, right? Because we actually did the craziest thing to turn down acquisition offers from a few local unicorns and sold it to a friend. Yeah, so the rule of thumb is when you sign on investors, it should be written in your term, right? Their liquidation preference and exit criteria. So some investors are more insistent on basically just making a profit or not making a loss when they exit your company, right? But some investors are a bit more flexible. So make sure you choose the investors that you really want to work with personally. I think you need to like your investors because especially for early stage investors, they're going to get very involved in your day-to-day operations, right? So we had a better group of investor, I would say. And basically, for investor, the kind of return they're looking for is like 4x, 5x, right? So if you're saying, I have this acquirer who can pay you back 1x and not 2x, and the other one maybe 1.2x, then it doesn't really matter to them, right? So when you get acquired, you just need to pay your investors back, and then just split what's remaining between the team members based on your shares percentage. So that was pretty straightforward for my case. And also it helped that we sold the company to my friend's startup, who's also a portfolio company of that same investor. Yeah, so the intellectual property is still within the family.
Right. I mean, that's happened to quite often to YC too, right? Like 20 or 30% of YC's companies, when they couldn't raise after the demo day, usually if they can raise it, they kind of merge to other companies too, right? That's kind of the way how they're hiring the talented founders for the company to just raise money too, right? That's a similar way. Yeah.
Especially for early stage investors, they chose to invest in you because they believe in you as an individual, right? So if they still like you and believe in you, they would understand that having a startup that doesn't work out in the first trial is something super common. They wouldn't want to burn the bridge with you over such small success, right? Because they still want to invest in you in the future. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of like a hashtag, the find right investors.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's take one more question. It's been 15 minutes. Anyone has any question? Yes, go ahead,
Anna. So my other question is, do you have any advice on MVP building and iterating quickly, letting go of the idea that the product has to be perfect before shared with users, and any other tips that can help us accelerate that process?
Anna, you're running a social media service, right?
Yes. So it's an app. It's a mobile app that is there to help people grow plants through both informational support and also the community support. So there is an emphasis on a social component as well.
Got it. And are you the product person on your team, or what's your role in your team?
Yeah, so I'm mainly focused on product and operations, and I'm also taken on a little bit of app development, which is, I guess, in the product as well.
Got it. And how will you describe the stage your product's currently in? Has it hit product market fit?
Not yet. We're still at user testing, more specifically like understanding the user journey, creating user personas. And then the app development, we have like a responsive design that can be tested, but it's not implemented on like an actual mobile platform yet. We're getting there.
Got it, got it. So based on your, I think for you to build an MVP, right? A meme that I personally like a lot is that MVP is too excessively used as an excuse to not do proper user research. You know, sometimes people just say, you know, we'll launch something, we're just calling an MVP, and then we're going to iterate after that. But I mean, you can't iterate from something that's just completely wrong, right? I mean, iteration means incremental like improvements, right? So, you know, sometimes it's easier to just grab everything rather than trying to fix it. So I think a good MVP is something that delivers value to your users for them to come back for more, right? So let's say, for example, if you want to build a means of transport, instead of building a very sophisticated wheel that doesn't get you anywhere, that will eventually become a car, you know, that's not MVP. The MVP for a form of transport would be something like a skateboard, right? At least it moves. It's not fancy, but it moves, right? So I think for founders to build MVP with very restricted resources, which I think is natural, you need to figure out where most of your users are, right? So if they're on web, build a web app. You know, if they're on mobile, build a mobile app. But try not to do both, because you just need a small group of people who really love your product, right? So choose one, and after it, try to figure out why would they want to use your app, right? And really just double down on that. So you might make a few assumptions over here. Let's say we know we're catering to plant horticulture lovers. So they might want to show off what they've grown, right? They may want to see what's doable in other common people's houses, right? Because sure, we see in the florist shop, but they are florists, right? They may want to get feedbacks and suggestions from the others, or they may want a marketplace to buy better products that are reviewed, right? So there are a few hypotheses, and talk to your users to ask them which one makes more sense, right? Or likely they currently have their own source of resources, source of information for the different items already. Ask them where do they go to get those go get those information currently. Go on their websites, go on those sources and see what sucks currently, right? Because what's currently not fulfilling the user needs is your opportunity. Yeah, so after you pull all these together, bring it to your target user, ask them for honest feedback, right? Whether if you show them something like this, will they be able to use it, right? If they say so, then you probably have a product, a problem solution fit, right? And what's next is how to find more people like this, right? If you get the product in front of them, they'll use it, right? So it becomes a user acquisition problem, and that's where you scale, right? So the product that you should invest in scaling with is your MVP.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense. I guess my one, not reservation, but like we've had a discussion during one of our, was it Fireside chat or one of the YuHsuan AI Lab meetings, was that there's different like type of companies, and there's the ones that like search for problem market fit, and there's also like a company that doesn't necessarily solve a specific problem, but that like provides a sort of like entertainment or like adds to an existing experience. And I think so far from the user interviews that we've conducted, we know that people like search things on Google, they can just go through like a few websites and find the solution, but the idea is more to like make their experience nicer. I don't know if that like disputes anything of what you said. but I just focused on the problem market fit thing. And I was thinking like how we can kind of also incorporate that other component into our model and like MVP testing, that we're not only to like solve a problem, but just like make an experience nicer and more entertaining, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That actually makes sense, especially for the B2C context, right? So one way to validate your value in this user scenario is to leverage other people's content, right? So let's say the content's already out there, but the users need either a better way for discovery or a better way to groom their collections, like save now, come back later, right? Or to add in that social element to interact with others. Then you could actually just borrow contents. I'm not saying stealing, right? You can do it through partnerships, or you can just use as reference. You just, as long as you know, it's like your content distributors for those other sources, right? So if you want to focus on becoming a delightful user experience provider, then focus on the experience part, right? And that the other providers do the content, the heavy lifting in content. It applies to other areas as well. And let's say what's considered an MVP, right? You don't want to just be something that's nice to have, right? Because figure out what's important for your users, right? Is the table stake having those interactions, or is the table stake having still useful information, right?
Yeah.
And try to get through this stage with as little resources as possible, because this is not what your product is, right? Your product is what's on top of this.
Yeah, definitely. Like one idea that we have that we want to achieve by the end of the summer is for our MVP to include the features that are just like basic, but people would download the app for. So like our question in user discovery and feature like MVP testing is, would people download this basic app like version of our app just for these features? And that's kind of what we're trying to guide our processes with.
Yeah. So earlier we were saying the product building itself is as important as product distribution, right? So I guess what you're trying to say is, even if you build a killer feature, how do you acquire users, right? So the interesting thing is in early stages, usually if you can let your users find you, what they used to find you with are probably what you should position your product as.
So
right.
Sorry, one question to that. A lot of the users, like a lot of potential users are using TikTok. And I'm kind of like remembering the part where you shared about like integrating yourself into other platforms. I don't see a way of like creating a niche add on to TikTok. Like, I don't think that's what they are working towards. So how do we approach like this thing where like our users are already on a certain app, but we want them on our app, or like helping out or like using our beta version of our app?
You can try to funnel them over from where they were, right? So let's say, and actually I know this is how a lot of fashion brands started actually. They grow an audience first, and then later on they launch something. And then since they already own their own pool of TAs, target users, audiences, it should be easier and cheaper for them to convert them into users or paying customers, right? So let's say you could create a channel on TikTok, if that's where your users are, interact with them, find out what they're looking for, right? Or even just become an active member in that community will actually give you a lot of insights. Yeah.
I guess also like one thing I would like to add is like, what's their hidden desire too, right? Do they want to get informed, or do they want to interact with other people too, right? That's even though like, kind of overlap type of like, the consumer like interaction, but thing is like slightly different. So that's why if you're like, probably creating the own contents in order to inform the useful things to users, probably like, that's the things like you can leverage existing like the distribution channel, which could be like Instagram, Pinterest, like TikTok and stuff too. The things that are also like things is usually how TikTok they become popular is actually they started to use different type of like contents, more like a movie contents, be like audio, music behind, by using like Instagram, Pinterest, and like even like Twitter too, right? That's kind of like they kind of like trying to get a more like a leveraging existing like distribution channel, because they're like main differences like content side too, right? Like type of the format of the information too. The thing is like yeah, it's if you do have like probably specific like question that you want to ask the YuHsuan, maybe like we can just like make an intro to her, and then you can ask the question if YuHsuan has the time. Yeah, what's the best way to reach out to YuHsuan?
We could do email exchange. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. Cool. And then we're gonna add it to also like your LinkedIn as well, so you guys can add her on LinkedIn as well. Cool.
Sorry, Jin, just to add on to that. So
right.
To attract an audience, right, you don't always need to produce your own content because that's super expensive. You could just become a curator at first. Yeah, so that's something I realized myself through building my startups. Sometimes you just need to pull the great resources that are already out there, and you'll attract your TAs quite effectively.
Awesome. Cool. In that case, we can take a group picture, and then usually we have like we have probably around like 20 students at this moment. 12 people are like high committed. They basically like work on like this program as like a full-time base. Rest of like students kind of like on and off. So like that's we're gonna like share like today's recorded like video and upload it to like YouTube too, right? So if you guys wanted to turn on the video, that's we're gonna take a group picture, right? Oh, with me, you're turning on your camera. You're doing yoga pose right now?
Who?
Rhythm. That's like he's working on the yoga instructor app, like yoga AI. All right, cool. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Awesome. All right, one more just in case. All right, cool. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Cool. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, YuHsuan. It was nice talking to you today.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.